Greetings, teachers and students, and welcome to Green Zone AZ. My name is Justin Ettinger. I work for the Center for Adaptable Western Landscapes at Northern Arizona University, and I'm going to be guiding you guys through Module 1. Couple topics we're going to cover in this presentation today. We're going to hit on public lands and our local national forest, the Tonto National Forest. We're going to talk about conservation and natural resource management. We'll hit on the importance of riparian areas, and if you're thinking to yourself, what the heck's a riparian area? That's okay, we'll get there too. We're going to talk about a project near and dear to my heart, and that's the Lower Salt River Restoration Project, and we'll end discussing a concept known as adaptive management. So let's just take a second and read this statement. Every 30 seconds, a football field. That sounds like a lot of land, right? Well, perhaps it'll be helpful to provide some context. So a football field here in the US is about 1.32 acres. Okay, so that means 2.64 acres a minute, 158 acres an hour, 3,800 acres a day, over 26,000 acres a week. Okay, if there's 640 acres in a square mile, then that means about 41.5 square miles per week being developed in the US. So what does that mean? Well, to put it into perspective, that's about the equivalent of the city of Tempe being developed every week here in the United States. Yet the United States remains in the top 5 countries in the world with regards to retaining lands in their natural state. And a large portion of those lands are managed by the federal government. Roughly 640 million acres of public lands are managed by 4 federal agencies. It's important to recognize that these are called public lands because they belong to us. While this land may be managed by federal, state, or local agencies, it belongs to us as citizens of the United States. And it's not only important to us as humans, but it's important because it provides natural protected ecosystems that benefit a wide range of biodiversity. Let's take a look at a couple of the agencies that manage these large pieces of land in the U.S. First, the Bureau of Land Management, with over 244 million acres of land, focused primarily in the western U.S. and Alaska. We have the Fish and Wildlife Service with just under 90 million acres of land, seen here in pink. The National Park Service, again just under 80 million acres of land in purple here. And last but not least, the USDA Forest Service with about 193 million acres of land. And if we look at the mission of each of these 4 agencies, we can find some commonality and start to pick out some key words or concepts, right? This idea of preserving or sustaining these lands for the benefit of current and future generations. And that's really what conservation is all about. It's the careful preservation and protection of something, especially the planned management of natural resources to prevent their exploitation or destruction. And we can't talk about conservation without a quick shout out to my man, Gifford Pinchot, not only for having a sweet handlebar mustache, but for being the godfather of conservation, right? And Gifford really bought into this idea that the purpose of conservation was to provide the greatest good to the greatest number of people for the longest time, right? So this idea that nature matters to us and it provides these resources for us, and we can make those resources last in the long run. It's just going to take some careful work and collaboration, right? Working together to accomplish that goal. Okay, so what are these natural resources we're talking about? Things such as land, water, soil, the plants and animals that exist there. And the field of natural resource management is really managing these resources to benefit or improve the life of present and future generations. So I'd like you guys to take a quick second, if you're watching this as a class, or even if you're watching it individually, and let's think about what are some threats to our natural resources. Okay, so we can think about things such as natural disasters, and here in the western U.S., for me at least, the first thing that comes to mind is going to be wildfires. We're seeing a big increase in wildfires across the West in the last decade, and it's really becoming a troubling problem. We could consider things such as environmental pollution. We've made great strides in mitigating the effects of environmental pollution and really limiting the pollution that's taking place, but it's still happening around the world. Certainly climate change is a hot topic, no pun intended, but climate change is threatening our natural resources and biodiversity across the globe. And that last one there may not be quite so obvious, but human population, right? That idea of populations expanding and the development that comes along with that. And let's explore that human development topic a bit here. So in this slide, we can see two satellite images captured over Chandler, Arizona. The left, captured in 1972 when Chandler's population was just over 13,500. And on the right there, 2020 with a population of just about 270,000. And what this imagery is showing is land cover change in this area. In 1972, the so-called suburbs of Phoenix were primarily agricultural communities. So all these red rectangles that we can see here are agricultural fields. Fast forward to 2020, and those fields have been largely replaced by the square mile grid system of development we're used to here in the Phoenix area. So whether it's agricultural fields or hundreds of thousands of people trying to survive in one of the harshest climates in the world, what's our most important resource here in Arizona? And if you said water, then you're right on the money. So here in this picture, we can see the bottom of the Salt River before it reaches Granite Reef Dam and is diverted to the Phoenix metro area. And in the Phoenix area, we really owe our existence to the Salt River. So the Salt River is over 200 miles long in its entirety, and it's been used for centuries as a source of life in this valley. Even today, the Salt River still provides us with nearly 60% of the irrigation and drinking water used by the Phoenix metro area. So we can think of the Salt River in sort of three sections. The upper Salt River, where it is formed by the confluence of the Black and White rivers and flows freely. So that's going to be that green rectangle at the top there. Free flowing, meaning there are no dams, until it reaches a series of man-made reservoirs, starting with Theodore Roosevelt Lake up in Tonto Basin. From Roosevelt Lake, it's going to go through Apache Lake, Canyon Lake, Saguaro Lake. Some of those I'm sure sound familiar to you guys close to town. After Saguaro Lake, it flows for its last 11 miles on the Tonto National Forest in what's known as the Lower Salt River Recreation Area. And there, as we saw in that last picture, it hits the Granite Reef Dam and is diverted into the Phoenix metropolitan area. Much of the Salt River Channel becomes that dry bed that we're used to driving over on the bridges in the Phoenix area, but eventually that Salt River Channel does drain into the Gila River. And really, the Tonto National Forest was established in 1905 to protect the watersheds or all of the surrounding land that flow into the Salt and Verde rivers, right? And that was because, again, those agricultural communities back then of Phoenix, Mesa, Tempe, later Chandler, were really relied on that water supply, right, to sustain that agriculture that was going on there. The Tonto National Forest is the 5th largest national forest in the U.S. at just under 3 million acres. And I've been lucky enough to spend a lot of my time in the last few years, previously working for the Tonto National Forest and now working with NAU, working in areas along the lower Salt River, right, in riparian areas. So a riparian area is the interface between land and a river or stream, right? So we can see this drastic contrast in the video here of kind of this green vegetation and contrasting with that surrounding brown uplands. So riparian areas are estimated to be less than 2% of the total land area in the arid Southwest, and less than 0.5% of Arizona's total area. But despite that small size, these riparian areas play a large role in the ecological function and values they provide to the desert Southwest. And really, that's all about the water, right? This increased availability of water. So it's important to recognize that water doesn't just stop at the bank of a river, right? Instead, it bleeds into that surrounding landscape. And that increased availability of groundwater is what creates a riparian zone, or that diverse population of vegetation that, again, we don't see in those surrounding uplands in the desert Southwest here. Okay, so now we know that riparian areas are the interface between water and land, surrounding the landscape. We know that there's not very many of it left, but what makes these areas so important in the desert Southwest? Well, wonder no more, because I will share with you why riparian areas matter. And riparian areas matter because they host a diversity of biological species, everything from plants to insects and wildlife species. And for wildlife in particular, they provide critical habitat and food sources, nesting areas, travel corridors in between developed landscapes. And especially here in the hot desert, man, they provide a little bit of shade. They lower the temperatures. They're important to the landscape because they act as a buffer between waterways and upland areas. This reduces the sediment runoff or sediment erosion that's coming from upland areas and entering the waterways. They help to stabilize stream banks. They play an important role in nutrient cycling and replenishing groundwater to the local landscape. And they also help to filter out pollutants that are entering our waterways. And despite this importance, riparian plant communities are rapidly disappearing, and this isn't really a new concept. It's been happening for decades. From here on out, we're going to talk specifically about the Lower Salt River, but it's important to recognize that many of these concepts can be related to riparian areas across the West, especially those that exist on rivers that have been dammed. So when we construct a dam, we alter the natural stream flow of a river. We're altering every cycle tied to that natural system. This can limit the regeneration of native plant communities that rely on certain flood regimes to repopulate. In addition to this, an increase in human population means a greater tug on that resource, right? More water entering the valley means less water that exists in the water table of these surrounding landscapes. And the last one there, introduction of invasive plant species. So invasive plant species are non-native or exotic species that are sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally introduced into an ecosystem. They're a big contributor to ecosystem degradation because they have the ability to outcompete native vegetation for resources such as sunlight, water, or nutrients. In doing so, they can create an expansive monoculture or a large stand or population of only one kind of plant. And they threaten the existence of native biotic communities. That's going to overall is going to mean a decrease in biodiversity. In addition to that, they can pose a significant wildfire threat. In 2017, we got a great example of how this all can come together on the Lower Salt River. So on April 25th, 2017, a wildfire known as the Cactus Fire took place on the Lower Salt River. It burned over 800 acres of riparian and Sonoran desert habitat. It burned really severely in a 230-acre area dominated by a monoculture of salt cedar, a certain non-native or invasive plant species that plays a big role in the southwest riparian areas. And this fire really exposed the role that invasive plants can play in altering fire behavior. And in the desert, they do that often by occupying formerly barren interspace, right? This allows fire to spread rapidly and burn at a greater severity. Obviously, this can negatively affect native vegetation that didn't necessarily evolve with this type of regularly occurring fire. In areas that are close to human development, such as the Lower Salt River, it can pose a significant public safety threat. So we can see a map here of the Cactus Fire perimeter. Again, this is on the southwest corner of the Tonto National Forest, just outside of Mesa, Arizona. Now, while this fire really decimated a piece of landscape in a very heavily recreated area, it also opened the door for restoration. So immediately following the fire, a 3-acre restoration study plot was established with the goal of seeing if we could control the regeneration of salt cedar, knowing that if nothing was done, this land would quickly recover to be, again, a monoculture of salt cedar because that plant has the ability to outcompete other native plants in the area. And by doing so, by controlling that regeneration of salt cedar, we wanted to see if we could allow native vegetation to recolonize the area. Now, we immediately started talking about how we could expand this management effort, right? Grow it bigger than 3 acres. But looking at the entirety of the 11 miles of what is the Lower Salt River Recreation Area, this area encompasses over 6,000 acres, right? So there are some challenges to getting to that next stage. And we'll discuss those and how we overcame those challenges a little bit more in the next lesson. But we decided to settle on treating areas inside the Cactus Fire perimeter. And so in 2018, the Lower Salt River Restoration Project was established to do just that, right? A partnership with many collaborators, but primarily driven by 4 partners, and that's my team at Northern Arizona University, the Tonto National Forest, the Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management, and a nonprofit organization known as National Forest Foundation. Now, the National Forest Foundation is a nonprofit organization designated by Congress, and their main goal is to provide funding and fundraise for restoration projects on public lands, primarily national forest lands. So what are the objectives of the Lower Salt River Restoration Project? Well, for one, we want to reduce the presence of invasive plant species. We want to limit that regeneration of salt cedar within the Cactus Fire footprint. By doing so, we hope to increase the native plant abundance and diversity, reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfire seen in the Cactus Fire, improve riparian habitat for wildlife species, and really important at the bottom here, the main thing that one of our main goals at my team at NAU is to involve the local community through stewardship opportunities and engage and educate youth through environmental conservation events. So how are we doing so far? Well, like we said, the Lower Salt River Restoration Project was started in 2018. Thus far, we've treated about 170 acres. We've planted over 150,000 native trees on the landscape out there. Over $1 million of non-federal funds has been raised for this project. We've united a ton of partners with this common goal of conserving this riparian habitat. In the future, so coming this fall, we'll begin treatment on an additional 175 acres of riparian habitat on the Lower Salt River. So through both active and passive restoration methods, we're really changing the landscape out there, right? So active restoration methods. This is going to mean physically removing salt cedar. So you can see that regeneration of salt cedar on the left. Like we said, we knew that if we did nothing, this area would quickly become dominated primarily by salt cedar. So active methods rely on removing that salt cedar via mechanical and chemical treatments and physically planting native riparian tree species behind it, right? Passive methods rely on the mechanical removal of invasive plants and allowing that removal of competition to encourage natural recruitment of native species. So here on the left, we're looking at an area dominated by a plant called giant reed, and on the right, we can see a species known as coyote willow, which is a really important vegetation component. Provides a dynamic and diverse understory underneath those big cottonwood and willow trees. And we're having great success in the natural recruitment of these native tree species, again, in the absence of that competition factor. And we're really doing this by building a true collaboration of federal and state agencies, nonprofit organizations, universities and private corporations, and local community members. Okay, so we have all this great work going on out there on the Lower Salt River, but how do we go about keeping track of this progress of all this work? And keeping track of that work is part of the monitoring effort, right? Which is just one step in the adaptive management process. So adaptive management is a systematic approach for improving resource management by learning from management outcomes. And it starts with assessing a problem, right? And then the next stage of the adaptive management process is design a management effort to address that problem. We then implement that management effort and we use monitoring to evaluate the results. We can then adjust our management actions based on those results. So for us, monitoring, for land managers and for us within the Lower Salt River Restoration Project means tracking changes in plant communities over time to determine the response to management actions. In lesson 2, we're going to talk about a technology called Geographic Information Systems, or GIS, and how we can use that technology to help us in that effort of monitoring vegetation species on the Lower Salt River Restoration Project. We'll talk about some varying data collection methods, and then really we're going to start to get into drones or unmanned aerial vehicles, how that technology can be part and beneficial tool in this overall package. Now, in the meantime, we've got some activities to keep you guys busy in between lesson 1 and lesson 2. So you can find those in either your Google Classroom or Canvas learning management system. Check out the Road to 30 story map. It's a great story map put together based on this idea of conserving 30% of the U.S. land and water by 2030. Some of the information that was shared in the beginning as far as that human development statistics come from that story map. Really cool resource to check out. Since this is the first presentation, just wanted to share with you a little bit about a bonus feature that we've included in each module of Green Drone AZ this year, and that's called Solutions Inspired by Nature, based on the field of biomimicry. Really cool and fun resource for you guys to check out, as well as some extra resources that we have, including some guest presentations and access to that USGS Earth shots, the satellite imagery that we referred to back in that land cover change discussion of Chandler, Arizona. So get busy, explore some of those activities, and I'll see you guys soon in lesson 2. Thank you.